A photograph from 1901 shows a widow mourning beside her husband's coffin. But when restoration software enhances the image beneath her veil, something impossible stares back, and it isn't human. If stories like this remind you how easily history hides its secrets, hit that like button and subscribe so more forgotten moments can be brought back to light. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and whether you think we'll ever know the full truth behind what really happened. Enjoy the story. The discovery happens on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2023 in the basement archives of Whitmore University. Dr. Mara Ellison has been working in digital restoration for 11 years, and she knows the particular smell of decay, not death exactly, but the slow erosion of memory itself. Paper turning to dust, gelatin separating from glass, history crumbling into silence. The damaged glass plate arrives in a cardboard folder marked with faded red ink, "Do not restore, Blackwood Parish, 1901. Someone sealed it with wax at some point, though the seal has long since broken into fragments. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that disintegrates at her touch, is a single photographic plate, cracked down the middle but miraculously intact. She places it on the light table. The image emerges slowly, a funeral scene, photographed inside what appears to be a parlor. A coffin rests on a wooden bier, draped with white lilies already beginning to brown at the edges. Beside it sits a woman in full mourning dress, her face hidden behind a heavy black veil that falls to her shoulders. Around her stand 7 figures, mourners in dark suits and high collars, their faces solemn, their hands clasped. It appears unremarkable at first. Victorian death photography was common. Families posed with their dead as a final act of remembrance, a way to hold on to something that was already slipping away. But something makes Mara pause. The woman's hand resting on the coffin's edge seems faint, almost translucent in the exposure. A trick of light, perhaps, or damage to the plate itself. She rotates the glass, watching how the image shifts. There's a quality to the widow's posture that feels wrong. Not grief exactly, something closer to vigilance. She loads the plate into the high-resolution scanner, a process that takes 40 minutes. The machine hums in the silence, extracting detail from a century of darkness. When the digital file appears on her screen, Mara begins the restoration, repairing cracks, adjusting contrast, removing dust that has settled into the emulsion like snow. Then she runs the motion detection algorithm. It's designed to identify blur patterns, to distinguish between camera shake and subject movement during long exposures. Victorian photography required subjects to remain perfectly still, sometimes for minutes. Any movement created ghostly artifacts, double exposures, smears of light. The software flags an anomaly beneath the widow's veil. Mara leans closer to the monitor. At first, she thinks it's simply damage to the plate, a scratch perhaps, or a bubble in the gelatin. But when she isolates the region and enhances it, something resolves in the shadows beneath the black fabric. 2 dark shapes, roughly circular, positioned where eyes would be, except they're too large, too wide set, and they seem to reflect light differently than human eyes should, catching the photographer's flash with an almost luminous quality, like an animal's eyes caught in headlights. Her hands stop moving on the keyboard. She tells herself it's a reflection, a technical artifact, something explainable. But the longer she stares, the more she notices other details. The veil itself seems to bulge slightly, as if something beneath it is pressing outward. The widow's shoulders are rigid, her spine unnaturally straight. And in the background, barely visible, one of the mourners has turned his face away from the camera, his hand raised as if to shield himself. From what? Mara saves the file and sits back, her heart beating faster than it should. She's restored hundreds of death photographs, Victorian parlors filled with the silent rituals of grief. She's seen children arranged like sleeping angels, their faces peaceful. She's seen elderly couples posed hand in hand for the last time. Death was everywhere in those images, but it was always human death, comprehensible, final. This feels different. She reaches for the folder again, looking for any documentation, any context. There's nothing except a small index card, yellowed with age, written in fountain pen, Funeral, Blackwood Parish, April 1901. Photographer A. Cohen. Subject S. Wardle. Warning, plate damaged during development, image compromised. S. Wardle. Celine. Mara opens the archives database and types the name. 3 results appear, all from the same collection. Church records from Blackwood Parish, a small village in northern England that no longer exists, swallowed by neighboring towns in the 1960s. She clicks on the first file. Parish Register of Deaths, April 1901. Thomas Wardle, aged 31, died April 7th of brain fever. Survived by wife Celine, aged 26. Brain fever, the Victorian catch-all for anything affecting the mind, meningitis, encephalitis, stroke, or sometimes just madness. She searches for more. A letter dated April 4th, 1901, from a local doctor to the parish priest. Reverend, I must report strange circumstances at the Wardell estate. Mr. Wardell took ill 3 nights past, shortly after his wife reported seeing unusual lights near the garden. He speaks of voices and will not sleep. I have administered laudanum, but fear his condition worsens. Please visit at your earliest convenience. Strange lights, voices. Mara feels the first whisper of unease, the kind that comes not from fear but from recognition, the sense that she's uncovering something that was deliberately buried. She pulls up the parish burial records. Thomas Wardell was interred on April 10th, 1901. The funeral was held in the family parlor, as was custom. Attendees included 7 mourners, 3 family members, 2 neighbors, the priest, and the photographer, and Celine Wardell, who, according to the parish notes, did not speak during the service nor after. Mara stares at the photograph again, at the veiled figure sitting so still beside the coffin, the widow who never spoke, the widow whose eyes, if those shadows beneath the veil are eyes, look nothing like they should. Why did someone seal this photograph away, with a warning never to restore it? What did the photographer see through his lens that day in April 1901 that made the image itself feel dangerous? And why, when Mara enhances the widow's translucent hand one more time, does it seem to be reaching not toward her husband's body, but away from it? The research takes 2 weeks. Mara knows she should move on to other projects. There are 50 plates waiting for restoration, grant deadlines approaching, responsibilities that don't involve chasing a single peculiar photograph. But she can't stop thinking about Celine Wardell, the silent widow in her black veil. She starts with genealogy records. Celine was born Celine Ashford in 1875, the youngest daughter of a village schoolmaster. She married Thomas Wardle in 1898. A good match by all accounts. Thomas was a land agent, educated, respectable. They had a house on the edge of Blackwood Parish, a modest estate with gardens and a small orchard. By all appearances, they should have been happy, but the letters tell a different story. Mara finds them in a collection donated by a Blackwood descendant in the 1980s, personal correspondence from various villagers, bundled by decade. In the folder marked 1900 to 1905, there's a series of letters between 2 sisters, Sarah and Catherine Marsh, who lived near the Wardell estate. March 19, 1901. Catherine, you asked about the Wardells. Mrs. Wardell has grown quite thin and pale. I saw her in the market last week and she seemed not to recognize me, though we've known each other since childhood. Thomas says she is unwell but will not call a doctor. March 28, 1901. I heard the most dreadful thing. Mary Sutton, who does the washing for the estate, says Mrs. Wardle has been seen walking in the gardens at night, speaking to someone who isn't there. When Thomas asked her about it, she said only that someone was crying. Mary is quite frightened and means to quit her position. April 2nd, 1901. The strangest occurrence. There were lights near the Wardell estate last night, like lanterns moving through the trees. But when Thomas went to investigate, he found nothing. Celine insists someone is calling to her. Thomas fears for her reason. April 8th, 1901. Thomas is dead. They say it was brain fever, but it came on so suddenly. Celine will not leave his side, and when Father Anselm tried to comfort her, she told him she could not mourn what she had already lost. What did she mean? The entire village is speaking of it. Mara prints the letters and spreads them across her desk. The pattern is clear. Something happened to Celine in the months before Thomas died. Something that made her withdraw from society, that made her walk alone at night, speaking to shadows. She searches for medical records, for any documentation of Celine's condition, but finds nothing. In 1901, a woman's mental state was rarely documented unless she was institutionalized, and there's no record of Celine being committed. Instead, Mara finds oral histories, interviews conducted in the 1970s with elderly villagers who remembered stories from their grandparents. She downloads the audio files and listens in the archive's quiet room, hearing voices scratchy with age, recounting memories passed down like folklore. My grandmother knew the Wardells, one woman says, her accent thick with dialect that has long since vanished. She said Selina Wardell was the quiet one who never spoke at the burial, just sat there like a statue. They all thought it was grief, you see, but Gran said it was something else, said she looked like she was mourning something other than her husband. Mourning something other than her husband. Mara pauses the recording. She looks at the enhanced photograph on her screen, at the widow's rigid posture, at the strange shapes beneath her veil, at her translucent hand reaching toward nothing. What was Celine Wardell mourning? She finds the answer in an unlikely place. A census form from 1900, filled out in careful script. Under children, the space is blank, but someone, perhaps Celine herself, has written in the margin, so faint it's barely visible. One expected, not arrived. A miscarriage. Mara feels something shift in her understanding. She searches the parish records again, looking for birth registrations, death certificates, anything related to infant mortality in the Wardell household. Nothing, but in the church records she finds a note from Father Anselm, dated February 1901. Visited Mrs. Wardle at her request. She is greatly distressed by her recent loss and speaks of hearing sounds at night. I have counseled prayer and patience, but she seems inconsolable. Her husband is concerned for her health. Her recent loss. Mara sits back, pieces falling into place. Celine had miscarried sometime in early 1901, perhaps January or February. In the weeks that followed, she began to experience what the letters described, walking at night, speaking to someone unseen, hearing someone crying. And then her husband died suddenly and inexplicably, just weeks later. The funeral photograph takes on new meaning now. Celine wasn't just grieving her husband. She was grieving a child she never got to hold, a life that never took form. And in her grief, according to the village whispers, she had begun to see things. Or had something begun to see her? Mara searches for the photographer next. Alfred Cohen. His name appears in several places. Local directories, church records, advertisements in village newspapers. He was a professional photographer who traveled through rural areas, offering services for weddings, funerals, family portraits. His work was considered quite good, judging by the few surviving examples in the archive. But his career ended abruptly in December 1901. She finds the record in a medical database of historical asylum admissions. Alfred Cohen, aged 43, admitted to Thornfield Asylum December 15, 1901, suffering from acute nervous disorder and delusional thinking, cause unknown, prognosis poor. He died 3 months later, in March 1902. Mara searches for any papers he might have left behind, any documentation of his illness. The asylum records are sparse. Most were destroyed in a fire in 1943. But in a footnote, she finds a reference to personal effects donated to parish records by patient's sister, 1903. It takes another week to track down those effects. They've been moved 3 times, reboxed, recatalogued, nearly discarded twice. Finally, in a storage facility 2 hours from the university, Mara finds a small wooden box labeled Cohen A, Personal Documents. Inside is a leather journal, water-stained and fragile. She returns to the archives and carefully opens it. The handwriting is shaky in places, steady in others, as if written over months by different versions of the same man. Most entries are mundane, notes about clients, exposure times, complaints about the weather, but as she reaches the pages from April 1901, the tone changes. April 10th, 1901. Photographed the Wardell funeral today. Something was wrong with the exposure. I took 3 plates to be certain, but each time the image felt wrong. Mrs. Wardell sat so still, I thought at first she was unwell, but when I asked if she needed rest, she said only, "Take the picture. He must see." Who must see? Her husband was already dead. April 11th, 1901. Developed the plates last night. 2 are ruined. Something moved during the exposure, though I am certain no one in the room moved. The 3rd plate is acceptable, but there is a peculiar quality to Mrs. Wardell's image. Her face beneath the veil looks doubled, as if 2 faces occupy the same space. April 14th, 1901. I cannot stop thinking about the photograph. I have examined it a dozen times, and each time I see something new. There is a shape beneath her veil that should not be there. I am compelled to look again and again, though it brings me no comfort. The entries grow more fragmented after that. In May, Cohen writes of dreams, where the veiled woman stands at his bedside. In June, he notes that he has stopped accepting funeral commissions. By October, he's writing single sentences. She was not alone beneath the veil. Something behind her veil asked me to look again. The camera captured what human sight could not. His final entry, dated December 10th, 1901. I understand now. The photograph was never meant for the living. It was meant for those who exist between, neither born nor buried. I have asked my sister to seal the plate away. No one should restore it. No one should see what I saw. 5 days later, he was admitted to the asylum. Mara closes the journal carefully. Her hands are trembling. She tells herself Cohen was suffering from some kind of breakdown, that grief and superstition had warped his perception. But she can't ignore the evidence. 3 plates taken, 2 supposedly ruined, 1 sealed away with a warning. Where are the other 2 plates? And what did Alfred Cohen see through his lens that day? Something clear enough to drive him to madness, but hidden enough that no one else could see it. Unless you enhanced the image. Unless you looked beneath the veil. The obsession grows slowly, like frost creeping across a window. Mara tells herself she's just being thorough, just following the evidence, but she knows it's more than that. She dreams about Celine Wardell now, not nightmares exactly, but strange fragmentary visions of a woman in black standing in an empty garden, her veiled face turned towards something Mara cannot see. She needs to find the other plates. The trail leads her to Blackwood Parish itself, or what remains of it. The village was absorbed into the neighboring town of Ashford in 1963, its church demolished, its cemetery relocated. But a few of the old families remain, their names appearing in local directories, their histories preserved in genealogical records. Mara sends inquiries to 3 descendants of Blackwood families. 2 never respond. The third, a woman named Margaret Sutton, emails back within an hour. "You're asking about the Wardell funeral. I'm surprised anyone remembers. My great-grandmother was the Wardells' housemaid. She left behind some items you might find interesting. Would you like to visit?" Mara drives north on a cold Saturday in April, the same month Celine's husband died 122 years ago. The landscape shifts gradually, cities giving way to towns, towns to villages, villages to open countryside stitched together with stone walls and narrow roads. Margaret Sutton lives in a converted farmhouse on the edge of what was once Blackwood Parish. She's in her 70s, sharp-eyed and gracious, the kind of woman who serves tea in proper china and remembers everyone's names. "My great-grandmother was Mary Sutton," she says, pouring milk into Mara's cup. "She worked for the Wardells from 1899 until Thomas died. She was there the day of the funeral." "What did she say about it?" Mara asks. Margaret's expression shifts, not quite uncomfortable, but cautious. "She didn't speak of it often. It frightened her, I think. She kept a diary, though. Would you like to see it?" She leads Mara to a small sitting room lined with bookshelves. From a locked cabinet, she retrieves a thin notebook, its cover worn soft with age. Mara opens it carefully. The entries are brief, written in simple language. April 7th, 1901. "Mr. Wardle took sick in the night. Mrs. Wardle sent me to fetch the doctor, but when I returned, she was standing in the hall, staring into the mirror. She said, 'Can you hear it crying?' I heard nothing." April 9th, 1901. "Mr. Wardle died this morning. Mrs. Wardle has not wept. She sits in the parlor with his body and will not leave. She speaks to him as if he were alive, but her words make no sense. She says, 'I tried to bury it, but it won't stay buried.'" April 10th, 1901. "The funeral. I could not look at Mrs. Wardell. Something about her seemed wrong. The photographer took 3 pictures, and each time Mrs. Wardle whispered, 'It's here. Can you see it?' But there was nothing there. Father Anselm looked troubled. After the service, he told me to gather all the mirrors in the house. We smashed them by order of the church." Mara looks up. "Mirrors?" Margaret nods. "That detail always struck me as odd. Why would the church order mirrors destroyed?" "What did your great-grandmother think?" "She thought Mrs. Wardle was haunted," Margaret says quietly. "Not by her husband, by something else. Something that came before his death." She retrieves a cardboard box from the cabinet. Inside are various items, old letters, photographs, household inventories, and at the bottom, wrapped in cloth, is a glass photographic plate. Mara's breath catches. Margaret lifts it carefully. "I don't know why Mary kept this. She never spoke of it in her later years. I only found it after she died, tucked away with instructions. Do not look too long." The plate is smaller than the one Mara restored, a different angle, a different moment, but it's unmistakably the same funeral, same parlor, same coffin, same mourners, except in this exposure, the coffin is open. Mara takes the plate to the window, holding it up to the light. The image is faded, damaged by age and improper storage, but she can make out the details. Thomas Wardell's body lying in state, his hands crossed on his chest, and beside the coffin, Celine in her veil. But there's something wrong with the perspective. Celine's reflection should appear in the coffin's polished wood. Victorian coffins were often varnished to a mirror shine. Instead, Mara sees something else. A face looking up from inside the coffin. Not Thomas's face, something smaller, positioned where no reflection should be. She turns to Margaret. "May I take this? I need to scan it, restore it properly." Margaret hesitates. "My great-grandmother's instructions. I'll be careful," Mara promises. "I just need to understand what happened, what Celine was trying to tell someone." Margaret studies her for a long moment, then nods. "All right, but be careful, Dr. Ellison. My great-grandmother believed some images are dangerous, not because of what they show, but because of what they reveal about the people who look at them." Mara drives back to the university with the plate secured in a padded case. She doesn't stop for food. She doesn't call colleagues. She drives straight to the archive and locks herself in the restoration lab. The scanning takes hours. The plate is more damaged than she initially thought. Cracks spiderwebbing across the surface, emulsion peeling at the edges. But slowly, pixel by pixel, the image emerges on her screen. She runs the enhancement algorithms, adjusts the contrast, isolates the coffin's interior, and there it is. Not a reflection, not a trick of light, but a face, small, indistinct, almost fetal, looking up from the polished wood. Its eyes are dark hollows, its mouth is open as if in a cry that makes no sound. And Celine's translucent hand, in this exposure, is reaching down toward it. Mara sits back, her heart pounding. She understands now. The mirrors weren't just reflecting Celine's grief. They were showing her something else, something she believed was her lost child, crying from the spaces between life and death. Celine Wardell wasn't haunted by a ghost. She was haunted by the child she never got to bury, the life that never took form, and in her desperation, in her grief, she tried to give it shape, through mirrors, through rituals, through whatever means she could find. But what happened when she succeeded? What happened when Thomas died and Celine sat beside his coffin, veiled and silent, with something beneath the veil that looked back at the photographer with eyes that were not human? Was it her grief made manifest, or something else, something that answered when she called into the darkness, looking for her lost child? Mara saves the enhanced image and sits in silence. Outside, night has fallen. The archive is empty except for her. And on her screen, Celine Wardell reaches toward a face that should not exist, in a photograph that was hidden away for more than a century. One plate left to find, one more piece of the truth still buried. What will it show? The search for the third plate consumes Mara completely. She stops attending meetings. She cancels classes. She spends 18 hours a day in the archive, going through records with the single-minded focus of someone who has forgotten why she started searching and knows only that she cannot stop. Her colleagues notice. Her department chair sends concerned emails, but Mara barely registers them. She's too deep into the pattern now, seeing connections everywhere, threads of evidence weaving together into something she can almost grasp. Celine Wardell becomes her constant companion, not the woman herself, but the ghost of her story, fragments scattered across a century of silence. Mara reads the letters again and again. She studies the photographs until she knows every fold of Celine's dress, every shadow in the parlor. She listens to the oral histories on repeat, trying to hear what the speakers are really saying beneath their careful village politeness. She dreams of veils now, of faces pressed close in darkness, of small hands reaching up from places they should never be. Her sister calls from London. "Mara, you sound exhausted. When did you last sleep?" "I'm close," Mara says, though she's not sure what she means. Close to what? To understanding? To something else? Close to what? To finding her. There's a long pause. Finding who? Mara doesn't answer. She doesn't know how to explain that Celine Wardell feels more real to her now than most living people, that she can almost hear the widow's voice, silent for 100 years, trying to speak through the evidence she left behind. The breakthrough comes on a Thursday evening in late April. Mara is going through church archives, the digitized records from Blackwood Parish that have been sitting in her database for weeks, unexamined. Most are mundane: baptisms, marriages, tithes, repairs to the church roof. But in the back of the 1901 ledger, she finds a section marked Restricted Records, Pastoral Matters. She clicks on the first file. It's a series of letters between Father Anselm, the parish priest, and the bishop of the diocese. The correspondence spans from April to June of 1901. April 15th, 1901. Your Grace, I write regarding Mrs. Celine Wardell, recently widowed. There have been disturbing reports from the household staff about her behavior. She claims to hear voices and speaks of performing rituals to quiet the unborn. I fear she may be suffering from a form of religious mania brought on by grief. I have attempted pastoral counseling, but she will not receive me. April 23rd, 1901. The situation has worsened. Mrs. Wardell has requested that I perform a burial service for her miscarried child. Though no body exists, she insists the child's soul is unquiet and must be laid to rest properly. I am uncertain how to proceed. The village is already speaking of her with suspicion. May 2nd, 1901. Your Grace, I must report what I witnessed yesterday. Mrs. Wardell brought to the church a small wooden box, saying it contained the voice of the unborn, and begged me to bury it in consecrated ground. When I refused, as you instructed, she became greatly distressed. She said, "Then I will bury it myself, where it can hear its father." I do not know what she means. May 12th, 1901. I have learned disturbing information from the local physician. Mr. Wardell died not of brain fever, but of some kind of seizure brought on by exhaustion. The doctor reports that in his final days, Thomas Wardell claimed his wife was summoning something through mirrors and would not sleep until he stopped her. He died trying to destroy something. The doctor does not know what. May 20th, 1901. Your Grace, I can no longer remain silent. Mrs. Wardell has been performing rituals in her home, rituals I believe she learned from some source other than our faith. She has told her remaining staff that she successfully brought her child across, but that her husband prevented its full manifestation. She says she must complete the ritual to let it rest. I believe she is dangerous to herself. June 3rd, 1901. The village has acted without my blessing. They burned several items from the Wardell estate, including what appeared to be a child's toy, a wooden rattle that Mrs. Wardell claimed carries its voice. She was present at the burning and made no sound, though witnesses say she wept behind her veil. I attempted to intervene, but the villagers would not listen. They fear her. June 10th, 1901. I have failed Mrs. Wardell. I tried to protect her from the village's superstition, but the bishop has instructed me to cease all contact. She has been labeled as practicing witchcraft, though I believe she is simply a mother drowning in grief. She came to the church last night and begged me to perform a blessing. I turned her away, as ordered. I will regret this choice for the remainder of my days. June 20th, 1901. Mrs. Wardell has vanished. Her house stands empty. The villagers say good riddance that she has gone to whatever darkness summoned her. But I believe the truth is simpler and more tragic. We destroyed her. We took her grief and made it into something monstrous. We refused to see her pain and called it evil instead. The letters end there. Mara searches for any record of what happened to Celine after June 1901, but finds nothing. No death certificate, no travel records, no gravestone. It's as if Cellini simply ceased to exist, erased from history by collective agreement. But Father Anselm's words echo. We destroyed her. Not a supernatural force, not a demon or a curse, just a village full of frightened people who looked at a grieving mother and saw something to fear. Mara sits in the quiet archive and feels the weight of a century of silence. Celine Wardell wasn't possessed. She wasn't cursed. She was simply a woman who lost a child and couldn't let go, who, in her grief, created rituals to make sense of her pain. And when her husband tried to stop her, when the church refused to help her, when the village turned on her, she disappeared into history without a trace, except for the photographs. Mara opens the enhanced image of the first plate, the one that started everything. She looks at the shapes beneath Celine's veil, at the strange eyes that seem too large, too luminous. She thinks about what Father Anselm wrote. We took her grief and made it into something monstrous. What if the camera didn't capture something supernatural? What if it captured exactly what was there? A mother's grief, so profound and overwhelming that it distorted everything around it. A grief so powerful that even a photograph couldn't help but record its presence. Mara searches the diocese records one more time, looking for anything else Father Anselm might have written. And there, in a folder marked Personal Effects, Deceased Clergy, she finds it. A private journal kept by Father Anselm, donated to the church archives after his death in 1923. She downloads the scanned pages and searches for entries about Celine. There are dozens, more than she expected. Father Anselm wrote about her for years after she disappeared, always with the same tone of regret. But one entry, dated September 1901, contains something new. I have learned where she is buried, though I am forbidden to speak of it. A farmer found her body in the woods beyond the Wardell estate, near the old chapel ruins. She wore her funeral veil still. In her arms she held a small bundle, wrapped carefully. When the magistrate unwrapped it, he found only a child's wooden rattle and a lock of blonde hair. The magistrate ordered her buried in unconsecrated ground, without marker or ceremony, as befits one who died by her own hand. But I do not believe she chose death. I believe she simply followed her child into the only place she thought he could rest. The village has agreed never to speak of this. Her name is to be stricken from all records. But I will remember her, and I will pray for her soul, and I will carry the shame of my failure until I die. Mara reads the passage 3 times. Celine didn't vanish. She died, alone in the woods, clutching a rattle that represented the child she never got to hold. And she was buried somewhere in unmarked earth, her name deliberately erased. Mara searches for the location of the old chapel ruins, but finds nothing in the records. The landscape has changed too much. Forests cleared, roads built, boundaries redrawn. Celine's grave could be anywhere or nowhere, lost beneath a century of forgetting, but the photographs remain. Mara pulls up the 2 restored plates and sets them side by side on her screen. In the first, Celine sits veiled and rigid, something beneath the fabric pressing outward. In the second, the coffin is open, and a small face looks up from impossible reflections. Where is the third plate? The answer comes to her suddenly, with the clarity of exhaustion. Father Anselm. He was at the funeral. He had access to the church records, and his letters show he tried to protect Celine, even when ordered not to. What if he took the third plate? What if he kept it as evidence of what really happened? Not a supernatural horror, but a human tragedy. Mara searches the church archives again, this time looking specifically for items donated after Father Anselm's death. The list is extensive. Vestments, books, personal, letters, devotional objects. And at the very end, Photographic plate, unlabeled, sealed in envelope marked EW Final Truth. Her heart races. She searches for the item's current location. It takes 20 minutes of cross-referencing. The plate was moved multiple times, recatalogued incorrectly, nearly destroyed in a basement flood in 1987. But finally, she finds it, stored in the church archives of Ashford Cathedral, mislabeled as unidentified burial photo, circa 1900. She emails the cathedral archivist, explains her research, asks if she can examine the plate. The response comes 3 days later. Dr. Ellison, I believe I know which item you're referencing. We have been uncertain what to do with it. The image is quite disturbing. You're welcome to view it, but I should warn you, there's something deeply sad about this photograph. It has affected everyone who's seen it. Mara drives north again, this time to Ashford Cathedral. The archivist, a young man named Peter, leads her to a climate-controlled room where the photographic collection is stored. He retrieves a small box sealed with archival tape. This is it, he says. I only looked at it once. It made me want to cry, and I don't know why. Mara opens the box carefully. Inside is a glass plate, intact, wrapped in acid-free tissue. She holds it up to the light. The image stops her breath. It shows Selina Wardell, but not at the funeral. This was taken somewhere else outside, in a wooded area. No coffin, no mourners, just Celine, kneeling on the ground, her veil pulled back from her face. And in her arms, she holds something small, wrapped in cloth. The image is blurred, as if Celine was moving or as if the photographer's hands were shaking. But Mara can make out Celine's face clearly for the first time. She's young, pale, hollow-eyed with grief. Her mouth is open as if she's speaking or singing or keening, a sound the photograph can't capture but somehow seems to contain. And the bundle in her arms, wrapped in what looks like a christening gown, seems to have a shape. Not quite solid, not quite empty, something between. But what makes Mara's throat tighten is Celine's expression. It isn't fear, it isn't madness, it's tenderness, profound, aching tenderness, the look of a mother holding her child for the first and last time. The spectral eyes beneath the veil in the first photograph weren't looking outward at all, Mara realizes. They were looking down, at whatever Celine held close against her heart, hidden beneath the black fabric where no one could see. Peter's voice is quiet beside her. Who was she? A mother, Mara says, her voice rough, trying to bury her child. She scans the plate with shaking hands. The restoration takes hours. This image is more degraded than the others, as if time itself wanted to dissolve what it contained. But slowly, the details emerge. Celine kneels in a clearing. Behind her, barely visible, are the ruins of an old stone chapel, the same ruins mentioned in Father Anselm's journal. The ground around her has been disturbed. She's dug a small grave with her bare hands. The bundle in her arms has a small hand visible at one edge. It's translucent, ghostly, the same quality as Selina's hand in the first photograph. Not quite there, not quite gone. And reaching up to touch Selina's face is that small hand, its fingers extended in what looks like a gesture of comfort or farewell. Mara enhances the image one final time, focusing on the space above Celine's shoulder. There's something there, barely visible, a distortion in the air like heat shimmer, and within that distortion, if she looks carefully, she can make out the suggestion of a face. Small, peaceful, fading. This is what Alfred Cohen photographed before the funeral. This is what he saw that made him take the plate 3 times, compelled to capture something that shouldn't exist but somehow did. Not a monster, not a demon, but a mother's love made visible through sheer force of will and grief, creating a space for something that was never born to finally, impossibly, be held, and then buried, and then released. The funeral photograph makes sense now. Celine sat beside her husband's coffin, veiled and silent, because she had already mourned. She had already said goodbye. The entity beneath her veil wasn't haunting her. It was being comforted by her, held one last time before it faded into whatever comes after. The village saw evil. The church saw witchcraft. Alfred Cohen saw something that broke his mind with its impossibility. But Father Anselm, in the end, saw the truth. A mother saying goodbye to her child in the only way she knew how. Mara sits back, tears blurring her vision. She understands now why Peter said the photograph made him want to cry. It isn't horror. It's the most profound sadness, the ache of love that has nowhere to go, no object to hold, forced to create its own impossible vessel, just to have something to mourn. She thinks of Father Anselm's words. We destroyed her. We took her grief and made it into something monstrous. How many times has this happened? How many women throughout history have been called mad or evil simply for grieving in ways that made others uncomfortable? How many Celines have been erased because their pain was too visible, too raw, too impossible to categorize? Mara saves the enhanced image and begins to write. Not a research paper, not a catalog entry, but Celine's story pieced together from fragments and silence, a record of what really happened in April 1901 when a woman tried to bury a child the world refused to acknowledge existed. She works through the night, reconstructing Celine's final months. The miscarriage in February, the grief that consumed her, the desperate attempts to give form to her loss, speaking to mirrors, performing rituals she'd learned from some half-remembered folklore, trying to create a space where her child could be real, even briefly. Thomas's death, caused not by Celine's rituals, but by his own desperate attempt to stop them, to pull his wife back from the edge of something he couldn't understand. His fear for her, his love for her, ending in the seizure that killed him. The funeral, where Celine sat veiled and hollow because she had nothing left to give. She'd already buried her heart in the woods with a child made of grief and love and impossible will. And then her disappearance into those same woods, to lie down beside the small grave she'd dug with her own hands, and finally rest. Mara finishes writing as dawn breaks over the cathedral. She has one more search to make. The genealogy research takes 2 weeks. Mara traces Celine's family line, the Ashfords, forward through time. Celine had 2 sisters who survived to adulthood. One died childless in 1930. The other, Margaret Ashford, married and had children. Her descendants scatter across England. Unremarkable lives documented in census records and parish registers. One branch of the family emigrates to London in the 1950s. The names change through marriage. Ashford to Wheeler to Morrison to Ellison. Mara stares at the genealogy chart on her screen. She traces the line from Margaret Ashford, Celine's surviving sister, down through 5 generations, to her own grandmother, to her mother, to herself. Celine Wardell was her great-great-great-aunt, the widow whose story was deliberately erased, the woman who was called mad and evil and dangerous, whose name was stricken from family records so thoroughly that Mara had never heard it until she found the photograph in the archive. She sits in the silent archive, understanding now why this story gripped her so completely. It wasn't academic curiosity, it wasn't professional interest. It was blood calling to blood, across a century of imposed silence. Her family buried Celine's memory as deliberately as the village buried Celine's body. They agreed to forget, to pretend she never existed, to let her grief disappear into unmarked earth. But the photographs remained. The photographs that Selina wanted taken, that she sat for in her veil and silence, holding the truth against her heart where no one could take it from her. Mara calls her mother. "Do you know anything about the Ashford side of the family?" she asks. Her mother pauses. Not much. Why? There was a woman named Celine. She died in 1901. No one ever spoke about her. Another pause. I remember my grandmother mentioning something once. She said there was a sister who brought shame to the family. She wouldn't say what kind of shame. We weren't supposed to ask about her. Shame, the word women carried when their grief was too loud, too visible, too inconvenient for others to bear. I found her, Mara says quietly. I found what happened to her. And? She wasn't shameful. She was heartbroken. Mara hangs up and returns to the photographs. She has one more task to complete. The exhibition opens in September 2023 in the university's main gallery. It's a small show, just 3 restored photographs carefully mounted with extensive documentation explaining the context. The title is simple: Celine Wardell, A Life Restored. The first photograph shows the funeral, the one that started everything. But Mara has annotated it carefully, explaining what the shadows beneath the veil likely represent. Not a supernatural entity, but the visual manifestation of profound grief, captured in an era when photography was still new enough, strange enough to record things that defied easy explanation. The second photograph shows the open coffin with its impossible reflection. Mara's annotation explains Celine's belief that mirrors could show her lost child, a belief born from grief psychology, from the way bereaved mothers sometimes see their children in every shadow, hear them in every sound. The third photograph, the one from the woods, is displayed alone on the far wall, lit by a single soft spotlight. Mara has written extensively about this image, about how Alfred Cohen must have followed Celine, perhaps at Father Anselm's request, documenting her final ritual, about how the blurred translucency of the bundle in her arms could be explained by double exposure, by light leak, by any number of technical factors, but also about how sometimes grief is so powerful that it becomes its own kind of presence, how love creates space in the world even when its object is absent, how a mother's arms remember the weight of a child they never got to hold. The annotation ends with a quote from Father Anselm's journal. I believe she simply followed her child into the only place she thought he could rest. On the wall beside the third photograph, Mara has mounted a small brass plaque. Celine Ashford Wardell, born 1875, died 1901, mother, mourner, remembered. The exhibition runs for 3 months. Mara stands in the gallery on opening night, watching visitors move slowly through the space. Some hurry past, uncomfortable with the image's unsettling quality. Others stand for long minutes staring at Celine's veiled form, at the bundle in her arms. Several visitors cry quietly. One woman, elderly, leaning on a cane, stops in front of the third photograph for nearly 20 minutes. When she finally turns away, her cheeks are wet. Thank you, she whispers to Mara, for letting her be a mother instead of a monster. Mara nods, unable to speak. After the exhibition closes, she makes one final pilgrimage. She drives north to Ashford, to the land that was once Blackwood Parish. The church is gone. The Wardell estate is now a housing development. But the woods remain, and in them, if you know where to look, you can still find the ruins of the old chapel. Mara brings flowers, white lilies, the same kind that draped Thomas's coffin in the photograph. She doesn't know exactly where Celine was buried, but she finds a spot near the chapel ruins that feels right, quiet, sheltered, a place where someone might choose to lie down and finally rest. She sets the flowers on the ground and kneels beside them. I found you, she says quietly to the earth, to the century of silence, to the great-great-great-aunt she never knew. I found your story, and I understand now what you were trying to say. The wind moves through the trees. Somewhere in the distance a bird calls. You weren't haunted, Mara continues. You were just a mother who loved her child, and they punished you for it. They called your love madness. They called your grief evil. They erased your name and buried you without marker or mercy. She places her hand on the cold ground. But I've given you back your name. I've told your story, and I want you to know, you weren't wrong to grieve. You weren't wrong to love something that never took breath. You weren't wrong to create a space, however impossible, to say goodbye. The tears come then, hot and sudden. Mara cries for Celine, for every woman whose grief was too large for the world to hold, for every mother who lost a child that others refused to acknowledge, for every person whose pain was pathologized, whose love was called madness, whose humanity was erased because it made others uncomfortable. She cries until she's empty, until there's nothing left but the quiet woods and the flowers on unmarked ground. Then she stands. She takes one final photograph, not of anything specific, just the clearing, the ruins, the dappled light falling through the trees. A place where someone once knelt with impossible love in her arms and tried, against all reason, to give it somewhere to rest. Later, in the archive, Mara will restore this final photograph and add it to Celine's file. She'll write a last annotation, a closing to the story that began with a damaged glass plate and a warning never to look. The annotation will read, "In the end, the photographs captured exactly what was there. A mother holding her child, that the child was made of grief and longing, that it existed in the space between life and death, that it could only be held once before dissolving into air. None of this makes Celine's love less real. We call such things impossible because we lack the courage to acknowledge how powerful love can be, how it creates form where form should not exist, how it holds what cannot be held. Celine Wardell was not mad. She was not evil. She was not cursed. She was simply a mother doing what mothers do, holding her child close, whispering comfort, saying goodbye. The tragedy is not that she saw what others could not. The tragedy is that no one saw her, really saw her, until it was too late. Mara saves the file and closes her laptop. Outside, the September sun is setting, casting long shadows across the archive floor. In a few hours, she'll go home. She'll sleep. She'll begin to let go of the obsession that has consumed these past months. But she'll never forget Celine's face. In that final photograph, the tenderness, the sorrow, the absolute certainty of a mother who has finally, impossibly, gotten to hold her child. Even if only for a moment, even if only in the silver emulsion of a photographic plate, suspended between light and shadow, presence and absence, remembering and forgetting. The veil has been lifted. The widow has been seen. The child has been acknowledged. And after a century of silence, Celine Wardell's story has finally been told. Not as a ghost story, not as a tale of madness or supernatural horror, but as what it always was, a story of love that refused to be erased, grief that insisted on being witnessed, and a mother who held her child the only way she could. In the impossible space between what was and what might have been, captured forever in the moment before goodbye. Some photographs don't show ghosts. They show the truth we're too afraid to see, that love creates presence where there is only absence, that grief can be so profound it becomes visible, that the line between possible and impossible is thinner than we want to believe, and that sometimes the most haunting images are not the ones that show us monsters, but the ones that show us ourselves, reflected in the faces of those we've chosen to forget, asking only to be remembered, to be acknowledged, to have their stories told before they disappear completely into the silence we call the past. Celine Wardell held her child in the space between existence and emptiness, and a photographer captured it, not because the camera could see ghosts, but because grief and love together create a kind of light that even glass and silver can't help but record. In the end, The most powerful hauntings are not those that frighten us, but those that remind us how much we can love, how deeply we can mourn, and how completely we can erase those who love and mourn in ways that make us uncomfortable. The photograph remains. The widow is finally seen, and the child she held, made of loss and longing and impossible, undeniable love, is remembered at last.